Thank you, Dave. This time I'd like to call on Amira Elghawaby. I don't want to say it wrong. I'm so cautious to not say it wrong, but I'm sure I have. Anyway, thank you so much.
All right, so let's just take a quick stretch. We have been sitting for so long, so just everybody get up, stretch, wiggle around, if you are comfortable to do so, just move around. Because I do want you to pay attention to what I have to say as well, even though it is very difficult to follow these incredible speakers and, you know, who I all count now as good friends. So let's just get our energy going as we kind of round this all up. All right. Okay, so before I begin, I also must acknowledge that we're on unceded Algonquin land today, and I think today is just one more testament to how crucial it is for members of various communities to stand up for one another as allies. So I want to stand up with all the diverse communities, all of our communities, for common values of inclusion, human rights, dignity. So where I'm going to start today, starting about allies and talking about allies, is I'd like to introduce you to, or maybe reintroduce you to, someone who got a lot of attention this past year, and his name is Alain Charette. Does anybody know this face? Some people put their hands, yeah. So, Mr. Charette gained local and national attention earlier this year for standing up to a bully. I think we should just call it bullying, who was harassing a young woman on an OC transfer bus last May. Haley DeJong, a visibly Muslim woman, was on the bus when a man started yelling at her, calling her a terrorist, a freak, a bank robber. Not only did other passengers also step in to try to stop this man, but the bus driver, Mr. Charette, yelled very loudly so that the whole bus could hear, "If you have a problem with her, you have a problem with me." So in that important gesture, Mr. Charette and the passengers who came to Ms. DeJong's aid showed all of us that it isn't enough to be tolerant or pay lip service to words like diversity and inclusion, words that make some of us, me personally, feel very warm and fuzzy. As Mr. Charette said in one of his countless interviews after a selfie of the two of them went viral, if you allow something like that to carry on, by not saying something, you become part of it. You become part of it. And we've heard that today. Last week was difficult because we all inadvertently became a part of that it. That sinister, hurtful, deliberate targeting of a specific community member for a particular characteristic that an instigator of hate has zeroed in on. Not just sacred houses of worship, but also in the case of Rabbi Anna Maranta, it was also her home. Now, the OMA, the Ottawa Muslim Association, where there was also this similar vandalism and hatred the night that the Park Today Church was also vandalized, that is also a mosque that I know very well, that I grew up in. So when I was listening to Bernie talking about his memories with the synagogues that means so much to him, it reminded me of how sacred spaces do really mean so much to us. The Ottawa Muslim Association, that mosque that you see on the Transitway in Parkdale, that's the mosque where my mother, when she passed away, the converts prayed for her soul there. It's also where I met my husband. It's where I take my children. So definitely, these attacks, these are not just buildings. These are memories. These are identities, and they are at the heart of who we try to be. And many Ottawa residents refuse to become a part of it. They sent words of reassurance and support to the targeted congregations. They came by for hugs. They took out time out of their Saturday to visit the the synagogue, and braved the sleet and snow to make it very clear that such acts of hatred do not represent the views of the vast majority of Ottawa residents. It is so important for me to highlight such positive responses to hate because it gives us much hope that when a community is targeted, the wider society will turn to the victims and will assure them that they are not alone. This wasn't the first time Ottawa stepped up, far from it. For example, following the vandalism of a local Islamic school in Vanier last April, dozens of community residents, the ward city councillor, and the head of the Vanier Community Association came out to the school to share breakfast with the students. Again, an act of allyship. And if you notice, we've heard a little bit about children today. And in this picture, you have the children, because remember, it's not just us here as adults talking about this. These are children who are seeing these places of worship, their schools, being targeted. And if we just go back quickly, you see that little Jewish boy in the synagogue, greeting people, coming to show solidarity. That is so important for our future generations to see. In the past year alone, around the country, we have seen acts of solidarity. Another story that warms many hearts is what happened in Peterborough following the firebombing of that local mosque. The local community, many from a local church, raised over $80,000 to help rebuild that mosque. Leaders of the local synagogue opened their doors to provide prayer space for the congregation until the mosque was rebuilt. Kenzo Abdullah, the president of the Kawartha Muslim Religious Association, received so much support from the community. And this is what we can be proud of. But in each of these examples, the allyship, as valuable and as necessary as it is reactive. And we need to collectively work on being proactive. So how are we going to do that? Well, for one, let's pat ourselves on the back. This panel is a great start. Many people have remarked that the timing of it couldn't have been better, for the lack of another word. In the past month alone, we saw the election of a man in the US who ran on a campaign that included hateful rhetoric about marginalized communities. And leading up to his election, various studies have shown that there has been an increase in the bullying of Muslim students. For example, there has been a step up in hate crimes targeting Muslims as well, up to 67% of an increase in hate crimes targeting Muslims just since his election. We also know that now he has surrounded himself, as been alluded to earlier, by individuals. So the most powerful man in the world has surrounded himself with individuals and ideas from the far right, people who have called Islam a cancer, supporters who talk about a Muslim registry and then the Japanese internment camps in the same breath. And again, that sort of narrative feeds right into the narrative of violent extremists who celebrate the victory of someone like Donald Trump, because it reinforces the narrative that we just can't get along. This is a sign, again, here in Ottawa, at a mosque that has now since built at Woodruff as well. So, as Doug Saunders says in his excellent book, The Myth of the Muslim Tide, many of the same stereotypes and tropes about Muslims have been used to describe and marginalize other groups in the past. He says, if we want to avoid repeating history, we need to recognize its patterns around us. Right there. And you've heard the myths. We hear Muslims are backwards, Muslims want to change the laws, we can't assimilate, we practice an inferior way of life, our faith is incompatible with our society, we're all the same, a monolith. The very many things have been said before about the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Roma, and many other groups historically, and still to this day. It's almost as if someone did a cut, copy, and paste the type of things that are said today. However, I would be remiss if I don't also note that there is an active Islamophobia industry that's been documented in the US, where over $42 million has been spent specifically spreading misinformation and lies about Islam and Muslims. Now, it's also important for me to emphasize at the point that I'm not suggesting that it is hateful to critique a religion or any other cultural practices that one may disagree with. It's true that we often hear, oh, you want to curtail free speech. No, this is not about curtailing free speech. Those who often try to marginalize Muslims will argue that to talk about Islamophobia is to shut down free speech and shut down the critiques. Islamophobia, like other forms of bigotry, is represented by attitudes and actions which seek to discriminate, marginalize, and yes, even exterminate Muslims. So I'm not sure if you can read this letter, because this is a letter that was actually published on the website of a mainstream newspaper here in Ontario. I will not name it because the editors have since apologized. I don't want to embarrass them further, and I blocked out the writer's name as well, because there has been a police complaint made against her. But if you read this letter, and I'll read it out loud, and I've underlined and circled what is deeply problematic. So the Brussels bombing, this is from last year, the Brussels bombing proved the Muslim community is unable to fully integrate into the Western democratic worldview. The Western democratic world has invited and welcomed these people into their countries, given these people housing, medical care, welfare, education, jobs, and in response, the Muslims both bomb and kill innocents and protect the killers from detection by authorities. The Muslims are not, quote, politically correct and resist any attempt at assimilation into their adoptive countries. And this is the kicker. Time to rid the Western world of this infection. Maybe some of you have seen this on social media already, so it's not a big shocker. What is a shocker to me is that this is published by a supposedly respectable mainstream newspaper, and that line that I've circled is actually potentially a hate crime, because it's calling for what Staff Sergeant David Zacharias talked about, which is the extermination, calling for a genocide of the people. So this reinforces why allyship is so critical. Being an ally with one community or another is to be an ally with all of humanity. That is what is at stake here. Remaining silent is a non-starter, even if the perpetrator is allegedly just a 17-year-old, because that deliberate hate, that deliberate attack is not occurring in a vacuum. So for Canadian Muslims, there's a lot of anxiety these days. We've seen a steady increase of hate crimes against this group in the past several years. According to Stats Canada, hate crimes against our communities have doubled over the last 3 years that data is available, 2012 to 2014, and this increase is actually unique at the moment to the Muslim community, and of course, as with any crime, one act is one act too many. And of course, I should also quickly mention that there's intersectionality. So when police reports come in, and so someone has been targeted, they have to choose one reason the person was targeted. They cannot click more than one reason. They cannot say they were targeted because they're black and Muslim, or because they're Sikh and a man or a woman. They can't do that. There's no intersectionality in the data. It's just they have to pick one. So I think that has some things to talk about. But anyhow, I just want to raise that. And as Staff Sergeant David Zacharias mentioned, up to 2/3 of all hate crimes go unreported. So we don't have a full picture by any stretch of the imagination. So where does that all leave us? Well, there are concrete steps that we can collectively take to combat hate in our communities, steps that are proactive. And I had the privilege actually of writing an op-ed with Brittany Farber, our keynote speaker today, and someone who's shown incredible allyship with many communities over the years in the Ottawa Citizen yesterday. So in a nutshell, here are some of the recommendations we made in that article yesterday. And by the way, here's an opportunity for you to go back, see that online, and write a letter to the editor. Let Ottawa hear if you agree with some of these ideas or not, or if you don't agree. All level of governments can increase funding for education, which we heard how critical that is, and the study of racism, as well as work on promoting diversity and inclusion, and work on awareness campaigns around hate crimes and reporting. There should be restoration of the federal funding to Statistics Canada for its annual hate crimes report. So basically, right now, Stats Canada will just give you sort of what are called data tables, which are just as boring as they sound. It's just a bunch of numbers, whereas before, they used to have enough money to actually analyze the data and tell us, what are these numbers telling us? What were the trends that year? What was going on in the world? Why or why not are these communities being targeted? And they've noted, for example, that yes, often it is visibly Muslim women from the Muslim community who are most likely to be attacked, harassed physically or verbally. We need to also increase the punishment of those who are convicted of vandalizing properties other than houses of worship when motivated by hate. So there was just an attack last week in Brossard, Quebec, where it was a community center frequented by Muslims that was targeted. It's not a mosque, so the punishment currently will be different. It won't be the same, it's not weighted in the same way. And also the Ottawa Public Service. Staff Sergeant David Zacharias should have all of the data for us to understand today. He doesn't have that data. Why? Because the Ottawa Police Service is not reporting to the Police Services Board about their data. They're not telling them. In Toronto, we get a full, comprehensive report as to what's happening in the city. Right up, in 2015, we have the 2015 report. We have to wait 2 years to get the data from Statistics Canada, and we should have that coming from our local police services. We should also be examining and removing barriers to reporting, and we should be improving the training of frontline officers in responding to complaints. So for example, someone might call the police and say, this happened, someone threw a soda can at me and yelled this terrible thing to me, and the frontline officer, well, you know what, like what's the chance I'm going to catch that guy? And they'll actually say that. And then I'll tell Staff Sergeant David Zacharias that a frontline officer told our community member that, and he's like, what? They tell him that? I'm trying to capture the incidents. I want to know what's happening. So even within a police service, unfortunately, there's disconnect. So we need to work on that. And finally, we need basically a system-wide approach to addressing hate crimes. So I want, of course, again, the theme is to highlight what's good. Staff Sergeant David Zacharias is an ally. He has been very vocal. My favorite quote from him that I have quoted to like everybody and their mom is, inclusion is the key to public safety. Right? So even from a public safety perspective, inclusion is a key to public safety. So even if you don't really care about it, it's important because it's going to help assure your own safety. So be selfish if you need to be to work with us here on this. And that's an image in the top, I don't know that top right for you. I don't know if you see it, but it's Chief Charles Bargelow, who actually attended an event held by the City for All Women Initiative earlier this year, which was showing solidarity with women who wear the hijab because he recognized that, yes, they are most frequently targeted. And that was a very important event. And there was actual pressure not to have that event. But the chief stood up for the community and said, no, I'm not going to bow to the Islamophobic, I should be clear, Islamophobic pressure not to hold that event at City Hall. We have launched our own, as civil society actors, we launched our own efforts to raise awareness over the last few years. We worked side along with allies on these issues. In 2014, we timed a press conference in Croton Hill with representatives from the Jewish, Sikh, Black, and GLBTQ community to launch a national awareness campaign around hate, emphasizing the importance of reporting. Along with our campaign, we launched the unfortunately named Hate Crimes and Incidents Map, which is on our website, which now documents anti-Muslim hate crimes so that we have an updated sense of what's going on out there, so we don't have to wait 2 years for the data from Stats Canada. We populate the map with incidents and alleged hate crimes that have been reported to us, verified police, as well as what's been reported to the media. So that's the poster, and we've been putting that out even lately as well, to speak out and really encouraging all Canadians to report. We have had various different campaigns just to counter some of the Islamophobic narratives out there. For example, we had an event here in Ottawa in minus 37-degree weather. I must say, all those troopers, like my toes almost froze off, but it's okay, it's for the cause. And we had this event called Canadian Muslims for Peace, again, just to counter the hate and the narratives that are out there. And again, we had allies from different communities join us in that very important message. Canada for All, a campaign we launched during the last federal election, which, as Staff Sergeant David Zacharias mentioned, was extremely difficult for Canadian Muslims due to the very negative and divisive political rhetoric of the former Prime Minister. Another example of an excellent campaign going on right now in Toronto. The Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants launched this campaign, which is basically, taking some of the things that many of us hear, go back to where you came from. Where? St. Clair West. So it was go back to where you came from. Where? Orleans. Like, really? So that's another example. And last June, we launched the Charter for Inclusive Communities, inviting individuals, institutions, and municipalities to endorse the document, which explicitly names Islamophobia alongside other forms of bigotry and xenophobia in order to raise the public consciousness about this particular phenomenon. And over 100 institutions, I'm happy to say, individuals and several municipalities even have endorsed the charter with more doing so every day. So to conclude, I know you guys have been sitting for a long time, and I really appreciate your commitment to this issue. I will quote Reverend Anthony Bailey himself, whose words have really served as a balm, I know, for many of us, but me personally. Words do matter. He also said something that I quoted in the Citizen yesterday, let's privilege love over hate. So I really appreciated those comments. The acts that we saw last week, the hurtful words and symbols targeting the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim places of worship are impactful, another quote. But actions also do matter, and they can speak louder than words. The actions of a huge number of Ottawans has spoken volumes about the kind of inclusive and safe city we want to be. There is still much more to do, and therefore much more to say. Thank you.